Hello, and welcome to Insider Insights. I'm Emma Wegner, Associate Educator in Public Programs and Creative Practice at the Met. In this series, we're providing closer looks at objects from the collection and exhibitions with Met experts. We hope you'll continue to join us as we debut each new video. Today, we're joined by my colleague Navina Haidar, curator in charge of Islamic art, who is going to discuss two paintings by the artist Payag, a major talent at the 17th century Mughal court in India. Thank you for joining us, Navina.
Thank you, Emma. Greetings, everybody. It's my pleasure today to talk about an extraordinary artist through two exceptional works that are in the Met's collection. And this is the artist Payag. To introduce Payag, I'm going to be through these two works, talking about him as both a worldly and an otherworldly artist. Because you will see that one work is very much sort of about courtly splendor and about the kind of material and extraordinary, the material wealth and glamour of the Mughal court and of his patron Shah Jahan. And the other work is much more of a philosophical discourse into the esoteric idea of death and destruction as in the Hindu system. And that is the sort of otherworldly Payag. So I'm going to start by introducing Payag. You see him here in a self-portrait that he created. He inserted himself in the middle of a very large court scene in a painting that illustrates one of the episodes in the history of Shah Jahan, known as the Padshah-nama. And this painting is currently in the Royal Collection in Windsor. It's a rare example when we actually get to see what a Mughal painter looked like. And you can see, had a very, he very humbly puts himself in the corner at the edge of a large court scene. You can see him lightly bearded and wearing a turban. This is a little bit unusual presentation for a Hindu courtier or artist, because normally the Muslim courtiers at the time wore a beard as a kind of a religious identifier. And also Muslims tied their jamas or their tunics under the right arm. But in this case, you can see Payag has tied his under the right arm. And he also wears an Ottoman inspired sort of textile. He has a great feeling for textiles, and he puts himself in this textile because it's a very prestigious form of imported textile, and also because he is presenting himself in this sort of style of the Mughal court. His personal identity, of course, was that of a Hindu. We know that because of his name, Payag, the fact that his brother's name is Balchand, that these are Hindu names, and also, frankly, because of the painting that he has done, which I'll be discussing in a little while, the Goddess Bhairavi, which has such he has such an excellent grasp of the subject matter, the iconography. He's so educated in the meanings and the implications of all of that, that you see that he has to have come out of a tradition, perhaps a personal family tradition, where he's really, sort of grown up with that depth of understanding. But let's first look at the worldly Payag. And the worldly Payag emerges when he is in the Mughal court, and regarding his capturing his patron Shah Jahan. You see Shah Jahan here in an extraordinary and very iconic image astride a dappled horse, which Payag has created. This image was copied many times all the way until the 19th century, so it sort of became an emblematic image almost of the idea of the Grand Mughal. And this, of course, makes complete sense for Shah Jahan in particular, because he was the Mughal who created the Taj Mahal. He was also a great lover of gems and jewels, and a great sort of builder of extraordinary architecture. And you see him here on this dappled steed, which we recognize from other paintings of the period, from those exact markings. And we also see that in a marginal inscription in Persian, Shah Jahan has given the words Amale Payag, which is attribution to the artist Payag. So we know that from Shah Jahan's own hand. Coming up closer to the painting, we see the beautiful luminous palette of Payag. We see the greens and the blues that are created through a very sophisticated mixture of malachite and other elements. We see Shah Jahan in a radiant nimbus, which actually is deliberately, it's not a crisp edge, it's a sort of radiant and luminous edge. And he's seated on this dappled stallion. As we come closer in, we see that the tip of his spear has a slight and subtle point of light at the very tip. Do notice those spear tops because they will appear again in the Devi painting in a very different setting and a very different style. You can see how the radiant nimbus has little beams of golden light that emerge from it slightly asymmetrically. But of course, the profile portrait is very crisp and idealized, as Shah Jahani images are. We recognize Shah Jahan very well through the images of his painters, including the little curl that he had in front of his ear, and this very particular, profile face that is very familiar to us now. Coming in even closer, we can see again the luminosity of the palette and the confidence of the line. We also see the subtle way, for example, in which the upper body is darkened and he's wearing a sort of white, almost translucent jama or tunic. And this element of darkening in the upper body is something that you see quite often in Mughal painting. And it has been interpreted by some to signify the use of perfume, which was very much used at the Mughal court by men and women. And then we come up and we can see that Shah Jahan is wearing actually all these pearls, and he's wearing emeralds imported from South America, rubies, which probably came in either from Burma, or more likely these are large spinels which came in from Afghanistan into the Mughal court. He has egret feathers that are weighted down by pearls. That's very typical for the Mughals, who followed the styles of their Mongol ancestors who wore owl feathers in their turbans. When you come up close to the horse, you can see that Payag has lavished as much attention on the horse's trappings as he did upon the riders. The horse too is decorated in emeralds and rubies that are set into gold straps. Multiple straps. There's a sort of yak tail finial that's hanging from his from his neck, and his mouth is open. You can see the way the whole logic of those straps and the reins and everything work, and they of course are beautifully grasped by this elegant hand here that wears a large diamond on his finger, on his little finger. This part of the composition is Payag demonstrating his great love for textiles and also his ability to layer pattern upon pattern to create a dynamic part of the painting, which is quite extraordinary. You've got at least four, you've got the saddle and then the saddle cloth, other elements above the saddle cloth to do with the riding paraphernalia, the decoration, the woven or embroidered decoration on Shah Jahan's trousers, his foot into the stirrups, even the designs on his sword. And what was interesting is that the very tip of his bow has a tiny inscription, which is almost invisible, but was spotted by a colleague in our field, Robert Elgood, who's an arms and armor specialist, and he was very interested in looking closely at the arms and armor. And he, in fact, found this little inscription, which hadn't been noticed by generations of art historians, which tells you how tiny and discreet it is, and how you still have to look for surprises and secrets and hope to discover them in Mughal painting. And here in this picture, you actually see the brushwork for the horse's fur, which is extremely fine and typical of the high level of Mughal technique that all the artists have mastered, including Payag. So that was the worldly Payag, who took his eyes and his skill and his vision to his patron and created a luminous and iconic image of Shah Jahan on the horse. on the stallion. And here we now turn to the otherworldly Payag, a Payag who looks inward into a completely different sphere to create an esoteric image of the goddess Bhairavi Devi. And this is a painting that depicts the Hindu goddess Bhairavi, who you see red-skinned here on the right-hand side, who is seated in a cremation ground filled with funeral pyres and littered with body parts. And in this cremation ground, adoringly looking at her, worshipping her, and perhaps evoking her, is Shiva himself, who appears in the guise of a young mendicant covered with ashes. And the two of them together symbolize both Shiva, who represents the forces of destruction in the universe, and his own counterpart, Bhairavi, who appears as a fierce goddess in an extraordinary, terrifying manifestation, which is not to be taken literally, but which is to be taken symbolically, as is the setting of the charnel setting all around them and the extraordinary borders which carry on the central theme. So to get into the depth of this painting, again, we have to explore it in detail. But let's just first remind ourselves of some of the basic philosophical concepts that Payag and the Mughal court would have been familiar with at that time. I should just mention that the back of this painting, the numerals and the Devanagari inscription indicates that it was in the court of Mewar at one point, which is a Rajasthani kingdom in the western part of India. And it's the theory, the prevailing theory is that this might have been a gift from Shah Jahan, the Muslim ruler who commissioned it as a gift to the Hindu ruler of Mewar, because he was supposed to, Jai Singh was supposed to have been devoted to this goddess. So coming to the basic idea, what are we looking at? Just reminding you that in the Hindu system of thought, in this, that evolved over many centuries and has many obviously dimensions to it. But one of the key things is the idea of of divinity as being expressed in the form of a triad that together capture the forces and the processes of the universe, the universal order. And they are Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. And between these forces of birth, preservation, or life, and death, the universal order exists. Each is bound to the other, and the balance between the three is a way of understanding the nature of our world. In this case, you see that Brahma, he usually has four heads. You can see 1, 2, 3, and the fourth one is usually on top. He is the creator. Here you have Vishnu, who is the preserver. You see him with his boar incarnation. And then Shiva in the middle is seen with a fierce manifestation here of Bhairava, and also a feminine form that comes out. And this whole idea of incarnations and versions is something that's absolutely integral to Hinduism and to Buddhism to some extent. Now, this fierce manifestation of Shiva, we're looking specifically at Shiva now because that's what our painting is all about. The fierce manifestation of Shiva comes about in many, again, incarnations. And we actually have a counterpart to Bhairavi named Bhairava, who appears in this Nepali mask of the 16th century. And you can see many of the features that you will see in our goddess, because remember, they are sort of feminine and masculine counterparts of the same idea, the same vital force that represents destruction, but not, and represents all the terrifying things, but not to terrify you, really as an aid to meditation, as an aid to understanding, and as an aid to also, as a way to also confront the evil and fight the bad forces, the truly evil things in the universe, of which this is the kind of way to fight or confront. So you see that Shiva's face, or Bhairava's face, has flaming eyebrows, has a flaming beard. In his around his crown, you see a crescent moon and a snake. These are his symbols. And there are many other symbols. You see snakes coiled around his ears as earrings as well. And you see that he has fangs and sort of large eyes, terrifyingly open. And his third eye, which is the eye of destruction, when that opens, anything it looks upon is incinerated instantly. All of these show that the face is absolutely in its most terrifying manifestation. And similarly, the Met has a feminine form of this terrifying aspect in sculpture, which is known as Chamunda, another version of the same basic idea. It's a form of the goddess Bhairava, his counterpart Bhairavi or Chamunda. She's known as Chamunda here because she has decapitated the demons Chanda and Munda and taken their names. And if you come close to her face, you see some of those same terrifying features. You see the bulging eyes, the fangs, the coiled snake, and you see the crescent moon in her matted locks, and a sort of necklace of a sort of mantle of skulls. Again, these are all symbols of death, destruction, and the power of destruction. What the forces of destruction? How do we understand them and see them in our mortal world? So now we come to Payag's painting, and you can see that Payag is obviously in this line of thinking. He is aware of these traditions. As a Hindu, he would be. But as somebody who's sensitive to philosophy and to the depth of these ideas, he's taken it to a very new sort of level. You see Bhairavi seated here. Let's have a closer look at her. Those pointed spears that you saw in Shah Jahan's, you saw Shah Jahan with that pointed spear. Here they have turned into horns, which are pointed in the Mughal style as kind of spear tops. You see the crescent moon in her hair. You see that she's wearing earrings and necklace and a whole skirt made of human skulls and heads. She also sits upon a decapitated body. Let me see if I can show that to you. And this body that she rests on, quite often these terrifying goddesses are shown on these decapitated bodies, which have a sort of system of symbolism. They sometimes represent the death of ignorance. They did represent the futility of a certain sort of priestly domination. They show the superiority of this force over any human force. But what's interesting, if you look at the way Payag has done it, the head is, I'm sorry to be so gruesome, the head is obviously freshly decapitated. If you follow the length of the bodies, there's still life in those feet, the way that they're clenched together. And it's almost as though there's still life in those feet. All around are these extraordinary things which you'd never see in Mughal painting. Generally, it's really sort of very special to Payag. You see a human skeleton decomposing and many human body parts. And of course, all of this, by the way, is blood that is spewing from Bhairavi's face, mouth. She holds up a decapitated head, possibly the head of the figure that she's decapitated. And again, Payag brings his brilliant touch to it because this head almost has expression to it. It almost looks, there's almost a sense of regret. And he is also, from his hairstyle, the single hair by which he's held, not the ponytail by which he's held, indicates that he might be a Brahmin or a member of the priestly class. In other words, symbolizing her authority over anybody and everybody, including those who profess to be her agents. In the background are these funeral pyres, and when I was examining them, there are 7 funeral pyres, and that relates to the 7 fires of the god of fire, Agni. So he is very subtly evoked through these 7 fires by Payag. And in the 7th fire, very impressionistically, you actually find a body. Shiva himself appears as a youth, and again, quite clearly, you can see that he is modeled on European, possibly, there's a certain European influence which was very prevalent at the Mughal court at this time. And so you see that he has the musculature, and just as Bhairavi Devi did actually, but he appears as as her follower. He has a crescent moon around his halo. He has a little whistle which he will blow at the end of time. So will he beat this drum. He carries a trident. All of these are his identifiers. And his body is covered in ashes and he's naked, which indicates that he's being presented here in the form of a particular type of religious figure, which today are called Naga Babas. When you get close to Shiva's face, you see that from his mouth emerges what seems to be a flame. And this has puzzled scholars. It's a flame indicated in gold and orange. And it's either a mantra, a divine uttering, a sacred uttering, or it is a way by which perhaps he has evoked the goddess. Not very clear what the meaning of this is. It's a very rare feature in painting, in Mughal painting. At one point, when I was doing research on this painting for an article that I wrote, I was looking at all these kind of gruesome details, these anatomical kind of elements, and wondering where Payag got these ideas. And one of the places I looked was actually in European prints, because they were very much in circulation at the time. And you can actually see, I feel that he must have looked at crucifixion scenes and perhaps got the idea of some of these bones and even the way that they're laid out in space from that. And then we step back from the painting and look at the margins all around, because clearly Payag has done them. And that's quite often the margins were done by other painters. But in this case, it is Payag. The margins, the hashya as they're called, were a specialized field of sort of related to illumination. And so you had specialists who did these beautiful, often floral or arabesque margins. But this very unusual one shows the themes of the main painting going into the margin itself. And the margin is very pale and hard to see. It's executed with gold, pure little lines of gold on a tan background. But if you look, you can see that the clouds billow in and turn into golden clouds as they go there. There are little figures all around that are related to the main narrative, including falling figures here that show figures descending from the skies above. There are jackals that surround the cremation ground, and they are, of course, typical of creatures that hang around cremation grounds. And there's a sort of little floral landscape here. Let's get closer. And we'll see that on the right-hand side, very impressionistically and in this subtle gold treatment, is the image of a lion. And the lion is the steed or the vehicle of the goddess. And so she appears here in keeping with the correct way Hindu iconography is done. But again, it's in a very subtle manner, so that the lion just appears in the margin. But it shows that Payag understands what the correct way to do iconography is. And then I thought I would end with an image of some of the jackals. The painted jackals are on the left, and then the more impressionistic ones done in gold are on the right. But you can see how lively they are, and how how they appear as part of the whole iconography of the scene. So together, these two paintings give us a chance to look at Payag in both his worldly guise and his otherworldly guise. He clearly was a great courtier, a great loyalist, a great creator of the imperial image, as we could see from that equestrian portrait of Shah Jahan. But he was also capable of entering a world of philosophy, of symbolism, of iconography, and creating one of the most profound and in-depth images of the goddess Bhairavi in this extraordinary setting, and interpreting it in a certain way, which we've never seen in painting quite like this before, or in sculpture. So I hope I've been able to communicate the two sides of Payag to you through these two works. Thank you.